Okay, today we're going to be discussing the WW-26 T float and thermostatic drip trap made by the Warren Webster Company of Camden, New Jersey. The Warren Webster Company went out of business in 1968, but before that time, particularly in the 20s, they put out hundreds of thousands of these traps, and they're still lurking in basements in downtown Baltimore. And sometimes it becomes cost effective to be able to rebuild this trap rather than replace it wholesale. So let's get into how to do that. It's a typical 6-bolt trap, but not typical. You have your inlet here, and you have your outlet here. It's 3/4 inch. This portion is piped to the inlet and outlets, and by removing these 6 bolts here, you're able to take this cover off. The thermostatic part of the show is underneath this cap here. The reason why this trap was taken out of service and cut open for demonstration purposes is that this cap did not come off at all. And normally when we take a cap off, we usually get an impact set, and the socket that you're normally supposed to use is 1 3/16. Well, this is a cap. This is what it looks like when it's successfully removed. A technician previous to me had tried to get it off with a pipe wrench, and what I did was filed this so I could get a better grip. The trouble is with a 1 3/16 socket that you can get is that there's still a lot of slop, and what happens is, because this is threaded into an iron body, this portion of the show is very difficult to get out. There's a lot of torque, and this will just rip this apart. And the other part of the show is that 1 3/16 really isn't 1 3/16. It's really a 30mm socket. The issue is that the metric world, which is most of the world, practically all of the world, lets us pretend that we exist with these imperial fractional dimensions, but we really live in a metric world. And so basically what they did is they took a 30mm socket, stuck 1 3/16 off, and most of the time we won't notice. But when you're confronted with 90-year-old equipment that was built to the standards of that day, this might not work. So a lot of times what you have to do, if this feels loose and you have a question that it might get ripped apart, you might want to get a 29mm socket, and I would varnish these edges. I've stoned this to take off a few 10,000ths. Take a file, and this will fit on there like that, and just hammer it down, get a good grip on that, and that should come apart with and you won't get stuck with that. And if worst comes to worst, you can cut this off and keyhole it out, and that should get it to work. But the other problem, which that was the first problem, so then we started taking these nuts out, so the bolts out. These are 5/16 by 18 thread, is that because they go into blind holes, and this thing is 90 years old, and there's little leaks by the gasket here, sometimes the head will break off, and then you're kind of stuck. And that's what happened here. So I've cut this open. This is what's inside. And so that's why this was taken out of service. Fortunately, I had some backup cores, and I was able to rebuild the backup core successfully. I was able to put this trap back into service without completely replacing it. So let's take a back up here and show what's inside a typical floating thermostatic trap. This is the inlet, comes in here, and the first thing that usually shows up is the air. And a float and thermostatic trap is really two traps at once. This is obviously the float part of the show. This is generally filled with water up into about the level here. You can see the staining on the and the rusticles on the trap showing where the water was in the trap. So the air comes and finds its way through the thermostatic element part of the show, and then must pass through this tiny, tiny hole out through here and out through the outlet. And this is what the seat looks like intact. And you can see one of the weakness of this particular trap design is to have a really tiny hole. And there's the thermostatic element intact. Inside of here is a fluid, which when in the presence of steam will expand, and this will then be pushed into the hole and block any flow of steam out. But this is the weakest link. It didn't pass a whole lot of air by design. This was definitely designed for the coal era, and is somewhat lacking. This part of the show here is well built. They used, for the time, the high-end stainless steel, and these parts here don't wear out very readily. And so this part of the show can be probably reused, but it's best if you've got this thing open to completely rebuild it. We'll go into that later. So as I said, air will show up and should shut this off. Usually, though, this thing has failed in the closed position and is not letting any air at all. The next thing that happens is the water will show up, begin filling the chamber. The float will lift and open this seat and cock assembly here, and the water will drain out through here. And as water drains away, this will shut. Even though there is steam in this chamber, presumably, as water is generated by the system, this will allow it to pass without the loss of steam, or that's the theory. So how to rebuild this? Take a look here. So if you successfully removed these bolts, and I would suggest completely replacing them, you want to use 5/16 by 18 by 3/4 inch bolts. This part of the show is still attached to the building, to the piping. You can take this down, and I would chuck it on a tri-stand and scrape off the old gasketing material, which has been there for 90 years. Usually I use a cheap chisel that I can throw away and beat up. If this is long enough, you might be able to heat this to this area here to a red heat, and then with a pair of channel locks, you might be able to get that out. This one was just, I figured why not? I'd use this to cut open to show you how this can be repaired. Again, I would run a tap in there, and I would use a plug tap, a 5/16 18 plug tap. And what I mean by that, just for those of you who might not know, taps come in 3 varieties. This is your typical tap set. This happens to be 1/2 by 13 national course. You have a taper tap, which most of the threads are imperfect, and so doesn't go far enough in there without really cutting into it and cleaning it up. And then this is the plug tap, which has only a few tapers before it starts cutting into the metal. And then you have your bottoming tap, which is, for our purposes, a little too aggressive. So for cleaning out these threads here, I would recommend a 5/16 by 18 plug tap. So only a few threads are missing before it runs into the bottom. If you've cleaned this up, you remove the cap, then you also want to remove the seat. This is 7/8 socket, and my recommendation, if you want to get this off reliably, is to take a 7/8 inch socket, probably 1/2 inch drive, and grind it so that you grind the bevel off, because there's not much to grip. And if you look at a socket, you'll see there's a bevel there before it starts gripping, and you probably want to smooth that out so that grips that, and this can come out, and you got that seat going. You make sure that area is clear. This float portion of the show can be removed by taking out this screw. It's usually stainless steel. Sometimes it's brass. And you want to clean the any gasketing material off this and get down to bare metal. And this is 1/4-20, so you want to use a 1/4-20 plug tap. Clean that out. Make sure that's ready to go. The Tunstall Corporation sells the kit for the Warren Webster 3/4 inch 00026 rebuild kit, and it's the 1RK-WW-15. And inside the kit, you get your gasket, which fits there like so. You set that aside, and you have your parts kit here. I'll open this fairly carefully. There's some small parts in here you want to make sure you don't lose. And they are, let's hope I didn't lose them. Where are you? Oh, looks like I have lost it. Ah, nope, there it is. Right there. Don't lose that little guy. All right, so let's take a look at the thermostatic part of the show first. You remove your seat. You got your threads here, and you want to get your, this is Tunstall's element, and it seats there with an EDPM rubber, and it fits right there like so. My recommendation is take little anti-seize and put that there to take care of any inconsistencies. And what's going to happen is you want to also anti-seize this, and that's going to go down there like so. And you will take a wrench and tighten this down, and that fixes this thermostatic part pretty well. So that's ready to go back on when you're ready to work this out. Now this is cleaned. You got your gasket, goes on here like so. And then this is your adapter. The adapter goes on like that with a set of stainless steel set screws. It goes on like so. And again, you want to run your tap down there because that's starting to really bind up. I have not cleaned this, and this is just to show you what can happen. And that is, you can also use a locking washer on that. I would recommend using that also. You want to get that bolted on like so. And now this is the continuation of the adapter. You want to have your gasket here. It's your bracket. And then you have your seat, stainless steel. And this goes on with a 5/8 socket, I recommend. And you want to hold back on this part of the show with a wrench and keep it more or less level. So as you tighten on this, it doesn't shift about. Like so. And this is the float ball. And you see there. Now this rod goes through here like that. And replaces there. The final thing in order to keep that rod from backing out is to take this little gripper ring there and put that on there. That's a little fiddly, and I would recommend getting a rod of the suitable size, and by holding it thusly and holding this back, push that, use this to push this onto that rod, and it'll grip and keep this from sliding out and falling off in the as this thing is working. I don't want to put that on because it's bare to get off. It's bare to get on. So that goes on like so. And this is what's up in the seat, on the piping still. A little bit fiddly. There we go. Like so. This gets bolted on with a gasket, and I would recommend using generous amounts of anti-seize. And again, that's how this goes here, is your cap with your new thermostatic element in it. The other thermostatic element that Tunstall sells actually threads into this and uses a bushing, as we've shown in other videos on how to use Tunstall products. With this rust here, they probably don't advise doing that. You'd have to get a tap of the appropriate size and run that in there and clean that out before you put the bushing in, and then you can just put the cap on as it is. You don't have to worry about this spring or this gasket, but you do have to worry about the bushing breaking as discussed. So this seems to be a better solution overall. As far as not having to worry about getting another weird-ass tap to get that on there. And then I would replace these with new, because this is pretty well crudded up. I mean, if you have to, you can run a dye over it or clean it up. But again, in the interests of efficiency, I just get new bolts and bolt it up. And that is how to rebuild the 00026 Warren Webster trap. And I hope this video is of assistance to you in using this, dealing with one of these beauties. Thank you very much.